What's green, yellow, pink, or red, and grown by nearly 80% of all households in America? Well, it's a member of the nightshade family, often referred to as the all-American vegetable, and that, of course, is the tomato. But interestingly, the tomato is actually a fruit, and it originated in Mexico, where it was grown primarily as an ornamental until the mid-1800s. But whatever you call it, it's fun and tasty to grow, and the success in growing a tomato from start to finish all begins with your soil. Now with the soil, you want to try to choose a soil that's high in organic matter. The pH should be anywhere from 6 to 6.8 and adequate in NP and K, and that means you're going to need to do a soil test to find out just what your soil has in it or what it's deficient in. It should be well drained and preferably free of disease, insect, and weed seed. Now the site should be in full sun. It should be really a minimum of 6 to 8 hours of sun to get your optimum production. And really the site needs to be accessible where you can enjoy the beauty of your garden as well, which would include your tomatoes. Now we've had a lot of success in growing our tomatoes in raised beds here in Oklahoma, and the beds are usually about 4 feet wide in any length and probably a minimum of 12 inches in depth. That way the soil drains well during our heavy spring rains, and they also warm up a little bit earlier for earlier planting. We've also had a lot of success in growing tomatoes in containers. Just about any container will do as long as you match it up with the size of tomato, and in grow bags. But probably the most popular thing we've done here at the Studio Gardens is growing tomatoes upside down in a hanging basket. And we get a 12-inch or larger basket, we cut a hole in the bottom, we just stick the tomato in it upside down where it's growing out the bottom, fill it with potting soil, leave a little bit of room for water to hold at the top, and then as the tomato grows through gravity, it uprights itself and spreads throughout the pot, making a huge hanging basket. And they're really nice earlier in the year before the hot sun starts drying the containers out. Now, really the question is, well, what type or cultivar of tomato would I grow? You need to think about things like, as far as fruit, do you want it for slicing or canning? There's also giant beefsteak type tomatoes, or you can get lots of production from cherry tomatoes. Also, think about your size and location again, because some of the plants are micro type or very, very small for containers, bushy type, or you can get one that's indeterminate, which means it will grow and grow and grow until the freeze kills it, or maybe some of the hot temperature critters stop its production. A determinate plant would be a little bit bushier for you, so check those things out. But most importantly is to know your frost-free dates, or your days that you can actually grow the tomato. And usually tomatoes take anywhere from 50 to 95 days from transplanting to your first production. So if you match that up with your frost-free growing dates, you'll be in good shape. Check for disease resistant. There's a lot of abbreviations out there listed with the tomato cultivars, and really resistance probably should be clarified more as a tolerance, but still yet it helps out as an extra insurance policy when selecting the appropriate cultivar. Now once you've decided what you're going to grow, check with your garden center to see if they're going to carry it, because you may have to order it or start your own transplant seeds. And you need to allow anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks to grow your transplants from seed to the time that you want to plant them. And once it's time to plant, don't forget to set them outside gradually to harden them off so they'll be ready for the wind and the hot temperatures before you set them out there and they get damaged. And it's best to plant them early in the morning or late in the evening, and if it's a very windy day like we usually have in Oklahoma, try to cover them with some kind of protective covering for at least the majority of that day to again let them get established. Now when you plant depends on your frost-free date. In Oklahoma, it varies because of our different zones, but if you're like us, we like to try to start our tomatoes a little bit earlier, and we do that with what we call cold protectors. And they're cold frames or hot caps or things like Wall of Waters, and there's many more products on the market, but basically they protect the plants from freezing so you can put them in as much as 2 to 4 weeks earlier to get a jump on your production. Now, with the cold protectors, don't forget to get some that you can open them up on the hot, bright, sunny days, because you can also scorch the plants during that time. Now, another thing that we've done in planting our tomatoes successfully is plant them in raised beds that's covered with black plastic or a weed fabric or a mulch barrier. And that again helps in drainage and heats the soil up a little bit earlier, plus it keeps the weeds out later on down in the season. Again, with mulching though, the plastic, if the plants haven't covered the plastic later in the summer, it would get too hot, so then we'd have to come in and cover them with straw, leaves, grass clippings, something else to kind of cool it off. But it's one way that we've found to successfully grow tomatoes in addition to the traditional raised bed way. Now, spacing of the tomatoes is very crucial because you want to give them enough space to get good air circulation to help prevent diseases, and depending upon your cultivar, they may need as much as 2 to 3 square feet of space between each plant. So watch the cultivars and what their optimum size would get on you. And once you get those transplants in, be sure and give them a starter solution either with a water-soluble fertilizer, or if you have a granular fertilizer left over, you can mix up 2 tablespoons to a gallon of water, let it dissolve over a 24-hour period, and then apply about a cup for each transplant to give them a nice boost and get them started growing. And probably one of the most important questions that comes up after we get the plants in is how do we stake them? Well, once it's warm enough to remove the cold protectors, then you want to try to either stake them with wire cages. We've used cattle panels, wooden stakes, or just using stakes or posts in between 2 or 3 plants and then doing the stake and weave method where you're using twine or rope to actually stake them on each side of the plant, and you may have to do 3 different layers to get that accomplished. But again, when the plants get taller, things like T-post or strong posts that will keep the plants from blowing over is very crucial in your staking procedures. And once the plants are off and growing, another commonly asked question is suckers. What do we do with the suckers? Well, the suckers are the growth that come up from the axis or the leaf axis of the plant. The bottom ones, if allowed to grow, sometimes will become main stems and get very woody, and the plants will be very aggressive and a lot of plant foliage. So as a general rule, you want to pinch out at least the bottom 3 to 4 suckers and then allow them to grow on later on. Now here in our test, we found that pruning a little bit with the suckers will give us earlier production and bigger fruit, but we have less production, and also they're more likely to get sun scald later on in our hot summers. So the ones that weren't pruned maybe were smaller fruit, but we were able to harvest for a longer period of time. So there's some pros and cons in either way that you do it. Now, once the plants are growing, look for that first cluster of fruit or flowers, because that's usually an indication that you can come in and side dress with another application of fertilizer. But boy, I really caution you here to not over-fertilize, especially with nitrogen or if you have a good organic soil, because many people get in trouble by putting too much fertilizer on. They get all leafy foliage growth and no fruit production. And so that will actually cause some problems by over-fertilizing. So if the plants look healthy, don't side dress them unless they absolutely need to. Mulching again, remember with the plastic we may have to come in more with a cover to help, but any kind of organic mulch to help keep the weeds out and moderate the soil temperature is very important, and it will also help make our moisture consistent, and irrigation is very crucial in areas where you don't get enough rainfall. So we usually put in drip irrigation types where we keep the water off the foliage, and that way we can be consistent and keep the moisture very consistent, because fluctuations of drought, that type of thing will actually influence or affect the lack of fruit and some of the problems, physiological problems on the fruit. Well, what about fruit set? Well, the tomatoes, even though they're somewhat tropical, are very tricky. They don't set flowers below 55 degrees or above 75 degrees. In other words, the temperature range for pollination is very restricted. And during our hot temperatures, when we get over 90 degrees during the day, even that also may affect the fruit set. So choosing cultivars that will set in higher temperatures is a little bit better to do as well. Now there's all kinds of pest problems, whether they're physiological, insect, or disease, that you want to look for, and there's plenty of good reinforcements to that. But you have to be active in the garden, and that way you can wait until the harvest, the time that you've been looking for. And a good tomato plant will yield anywhere from 8 to 12 pounds of fruit per plant. and you want to make sure they're vine ripe, that the color change is occurring. And in most cases, once you've harvested them, you want to remove the calyx so you don't puncture any of your fruit. And most importantly, you've gone through all this work. Whatever you do, don't stick the tomatoes in the refrigerator. That actually kills the ripening process. Let them ripen at room temperature, and once they're completely ripened, you know you need to store them for a few days so they don't rot on you. Then you can put them in the refrigerator. But doing it too early will absolutely devastate the taste of the tomato that you've worked so hard. So there's a lot of information out on growing tomatoes from your county extension office, retail garden centers, and don't forget to ask your neighbors their experiences, because you'll get a lot of valuable information. So to grow that perfect tomato from start to finish, it takes a little bit of pre-planning, and you need to be out in the garden and active again, because that's part of the fun experience. Experiencing the plants growing, watching for pests, getting a hold of it before the plants are devastated. Again, just be active in watching those changes. That way you can also enjoy that perfect tomato sandwich, hopefully like I'm going to do here sometime this year.